Hello and welcome to the MADEcast, the official podcast of the Museum of Art and Digital Entertainment, a series of lectures on video game history as part of the MADE's ongoing effort to preserve history through teaching and displaying playable exhibits of rare games and consoles.
While life in the time of COVID has forced us to close our doors, the support of people like you has allowed us to continue to bring history to you through lectures like the one you'll hear in a few minutes. I am Red.
I'm Anthony.
And I'm Chun. This week, Alex talks with Ron Gilbert, another of the original Lucasfilm Games team, another one of the main minds behind the Maniac Mansion, and a champion of adventure games. It has been a fun talk with Ron, and I really like his opinion on the current adventure games community. I really agree about him saying the community is not that. It's just the other part of the game community is changing. Like the player base has changed, and I can't agree more about his thought about the game developing companies before should be more generously releasing their source code, so that they should be more generously releasing their source code so that the titles which have no more market values can be archived by more people or organizations like us. And
yeah, exactly. That's one of the main things that the MADE does is we try to preserve all these older games and stuff for history. And he brings up a great point when we talk about preserving these games and releasing the source code, because there's so many instances where games can just be lost and not saved. There's no more way for people to access them and to maintain them and keep them up to date. It's kind of, we have it for movies, and like old movies, they're being constantly like re-released and updated on like the new versions of the software, DVDs and Blu-rays, and now just digital downloads. So it should be more readily accessible, because at a certain point, it's just like, it would be like a movie theater just showing a movie, and then it's like, nope, you never get to see it again. It's like, we're not like, you don't get to, or like, we're gonna take your game back. We're gonna take your copy of the movie back.
Yeah,
you can't mess with it anymore.
Yeah.
So thank you, Ron, for continuing to talk about that.
Yeah. And we'll leave the rest for you to listen. Here goes the talk.
Hey, welcome back. I am here with the amazing Ron Gilbert. Thank you for joining us today, Ron.
Hey, thanks a lot.
You really don't need much of an introduction, since we've been talking and leading up to Maniac Mansion history for quite some time now. But I was wondering if you could sort of set the stage. What was it like sitting in the room and brainstorming, say, with Chip and David and maybe anybody else, to come to the point where you were going to build the first LucasArts real adventure game after Labyrinth here? What was sort of the impetus? What was the stage like?
Well, I think the impetus was I didn't want to lose my job. I think that's the kind of the main thing that started everything, was because when I started at Lucasfilm, I was just a contractor, and I was working on Corona's Rift, which was the game that Noah was working on, and my contract had come to an end, and I didn't want to lose my job. I didn't want to not work there anymore. So I teamed up with Gary Winnick, who was an artist there, and he and I sat down and tried to come up with an idea for a new game that we could make together. And I think, when we first started doing it, it wasn't really an adventure game. We didn't quite know what it was. We had a lot of jokes, and Gary drew a lot of funny things, but we didn't really know that it was an adventure game, and that kind of bothered me, because I didn't actually know what the game was. I know we had a lot of funny things and a lot of funny characters, but I didn't know what the game was. And it really kind of started out that I went off for Christmas break, and I saw my cousin, who was 8 at the time, and he was playing King's Quest. And I watched that and I went, oh, well, that is exactly what Maniac Mansion needs to be. It needs to be an adventure game. So I came back from that Christmas break and I sat down with Gary and I said, look, this has to be an adventure game. And so that's when we started designing the whole thing out to be an adventure game, was after that.
And when was it that you decided to implement the sort of the technology that you became SCUMM and Sputum with the interpretive bytecode?
Well, I started to build the game just in straight 6502. You know, I was coding up a lot of the game logic in 6502 assembly language, and that just very quickly became obvious I was never going to be able to complete this game, you know, coding the whole thing in 6502. And I can't remember the exact impetus of it, but I remember I was talking to Chip Morningstar about it, and he was the one that suggested, hey, why don't you do a little interpreter? And he, you know, whipped up the compiler in probably his lunch break, knowing Chip, and that was kind of what I built everything on, was that initial stuff that Chip had done. And, you know, at the time, and people like, you know, Infocom and probably Sierra were all using byte interpreters, you know, for their stuff. So, I mean, just using a byte interpreter for an adventure game itself wasn't really novel. But, you know, we had a twist on the way that the verbs were represented. They were represented on the screen. There was no parser. So there was a lot of stuff about it that, you know, to me personally was very interesting.
That's funny because Chip said to ask you where the actual inspiration for that came from.
Yeah, no, I very clearly remember talking to Chip, and I very clearly remember Chip going, "You should just build an interpreter." And my first thought was, Chip, you're absolutely crazy. That is not possible on a 6502. So I know the idea initially came from him, yeah.
That's great. I mean, but this was also, you were using that cross-compiler, Macross, to compile the 6502 on Sun machines, right?
Macross was really a lot of fun because it was kind of this weird blend between C and assembly language, and I mean, I really enjoyed it. And I think, you know, Chris had written the whole Macross compiler. You know, so he had kind of done that first, and I think that really helped in, you know, jump-starting the SCUMM stuff, because I think he had a lot of this groundwork already laid.
I feel like a lot of the success of your development processes in those early days was just down to having amazing development tools.
Yeah, the development tools were really crazy. You know, when I first started programming on the 65 or on the Commodore 64, you know, I was kind of pounding code out on the Commodore 64, and I was having to save it to a floppy disk on the Commodore 64 and all this stuff. And then when I got to Lucasfilm, I realized that they were compiling their 6502 on VAX mainframes, you know, and so it was like, wow, that is like completely different than I'm used to. And so, yeah, I mean, a lot of the development, you know, we were all working on VAXs and mainframes and Sun Microsystem computers, and they were doing all the compiling and the saving the code and all this stuff. And then it was just kind of downloaded to the Commodore 64, you know, to run. But our development system was actually these other machines, and that was just a huge time saver.
And I keep harping on this in this podcast, but that's the kind of thing that people pay millions of dollars for their development process to go faster today, right? To have these fast iteration processes and faster compile times.
Yeah, tools. I mean, when you're building games, I mean, today, especially so, I mean, tools are so important, right? If you have a good set of tools to make your game, you're just leaps and bounds ahead. And you know, at Lucasfilm, the tools we had were just amazing for the time.
Do you remember any of that maybe inspiring some of your later work, maybe at Humongous or later on in life?
Well, I mean, I definitely think the work that I did on the SCUMM system and building that compiler and that interpreter, I mean, I'd always been interested in computer languages. You know, before I started Lucasfilm, I had released a product called Graphics Basic, which was an expansion of the basic interpreter on the Commodore 64. So I'd always kind of had an interest in that. And I think, you know, building the SCUMM stuff with Chip really solidified that. And, you know, since then I've built many development systems. I've built many little scripting languages for games. And it's just something I've really, really kind of enjoyed.
It's come so far since those times now. I mean, we have Unity and Unreal. I mean, it used to be that you would sit down and make your tools and then you would make your games, but now those tools seem to have solidified fairly well.
Yeah, things like Unreal and Unity and lots of stuff has really been great because you know if you want to build a game, you don't need to know a lot of low level programming and understand how to deal with graphics cards and GPUs and all this stuff because you do have this nice tool set that can go with it. But I think that's just a part of the maturing of the industry. You know, people that make movies don't have to go out and build their own cameras anymore. So it's very analogous to that.
Certainly. Let's if we can shift gears a little and talk about some of the things that took place after Maniac Mansion. Of course, everybody always wants to talk about Monkey Island and so forth, but are there any memories you have of those development processes? Any kind of limitations in the SCUMM engine that you had to make room for, or any difficult, ceilings that you butted up against?
Well, we were always butting up against ceilings, right? I think that's the nature of game development. You know, you're always trying to push the edge of something. And, today it's, the edge of 3D graphics. And, back then it was 256 color VGA graphics, but it was an edge that we were pushing against. And, the SCUMM system evolved from the Commodore 64 and it went to the IBM PC, and that was 16 color, EGA graphics. And then we moved up to VGA when we started doing Monkey Island. And so that required kind of a revamp of how things are working because now we had, a very different graphics we had to support. And then when we did Monkey Island 2, Peter Chan and Stu Purcell, they did all those backgrounds on paper and then they were scanned in on a scanner. And then we used literally Photoshop 1.0 to take those in and to massage them. But that all had to still work on VGA graphics. So, we did a lot of work. Eric Wilmunder and Brad Taylor did a lot of work with compressing those images down so we could take these really beautiful scans that, Peter Chan had done and we could get them on the VGA screen.
But by that time, you'd had a lot of experience in squeezing every last bit out of the save medium. I mean, from Maniac Mansion on the C64 had to have used everything that thing was capable of.
Yeah, I think that just comes with the territory, of game development. It's just squeezing everything you can, out of the hardware.
It's become a little less so now, I feel like, though. I mean, you can just sort of make your game as large as possible. I mean, you do have to optimize it before you ship it, but, you can ship a gigs and gigs worth of games these days.
You can, but you still have to be somewhat careful. It's like I kind of look at games I make today as like I have unlimited memory, right? Because everybody's got at least a couple of gig on their machine, and then with virtual paging, it's virtually limitless. So I just don't worry about how much memory I have anymore. That doesn't matter. But the game's got to run on mobile. And I do have to worry about memory on mobile, right? So there's kind of those things you have to worry about, or you have to worry about the console machines. Console machines are a little bit more limited in what you can do with them. PCs were very used to being able to do anything we wanted, anytime we wanted. You get into consoles, and you can't really do that. So there is still a lot of massaging that has to happen with that stuff.
Definitely. What are you working on now? I've noticed on your blog you've been wrestling with a few things.
I'm making another adventure game. We haven't announced it yet, so we're still kind of quiet on it. But I am doing another adventure game.
Can you maybe contrast the development tool experience with the Maniac Mansion experience? I mean, is it still sort of setting the stage and setting the triggers, or is it completely different now that you have these more advanced tools?
Well, I think fundamentally it is. I mean, it's not really fair to compare Maniac Mansion because Maniac Mansion was, Gary and I's first game that we'd ever made. So it was a complete mess from start to finish, right? But I think if you look at something like, Monkey Island, which, I had done Maniac Mansion, had done the Indiana Jones game, and David had done, Zach McCracken. I think we had a lot more experience at that point. So, I mean, this is probably more akin to working on Monkey Island or Monkey Island 2, in terms of, designing things and planning things out a little bit more. But I think with adventure games, you kind of always start with the setting. I think the setting is more important than anything. Maniac Mansion, it was the house. that was the setting. And for Monkey Island, it was this weird pirate world. And, you start with the setting, and then, you build story on top of that, and characters on top of that, and then puzzles on top of that. And I don't think that has really changed much.
Another thing we've touched on this podcast is sort of the lull in adventure games. Sort of around the 2000 period, adventure games sort of vanished a little bit, and then they sort of had to be reborn. That's a natural part of genres in the video game industry. But did you have any memories of sort of that period? Was there any disillusionment or anything?
No, because at the point that the popularity of adventure games. It's like people say adventure games died, or adventure games went away, or adventure games waned, and I don't believe that's actually true. I think adventure games always were just as popular as ever. It's just that other games, like when Doom came out, their popularity went through the roof, and adventure games just didn't follow that trajectory. So I think a lot of people look at adventure games as, oh, you died and you went away. It's like, no, we didn't. We were still there. We were just eclipsed by all these other games who are now selling, 10, 20, or 100 times, what we were. And I think the reason adventure games have kind of come back in flavor a little bit is I think the audience has changed. It's like when things like Doom came out, you had this very particular kind of hardcore audience, and that really remained the predominant audience for games for quite a while. And then mobile came out and just totally changed who plays games. And that kind of audience is starting to creep its way into adventure games on platforms like PCs, or like Thimbleweed Park, which I just got done doing. I mean, we've sold almost as many copies of that on iOS and Android as we have on PC. And I think that's where you really kind of get this more mainstream, larger audience for narrative and adventure games.
Certainly. And the mobile devices and tablets, they just lend themselves perfectly to the old point-and-click adventure stories.
Yeah, I mean, they were point-and-click with a mouse, and now you just do it with your finger. It makes a lot more sense.
It does. Some of the other genres that have transferred to phone and mobile devices haven't necessarily made that jump as easily, like the first-person shooters and so forth. It's kind of ironic.
Yeah, the control mechanism of touchscreens was perfect for point-and-click adventures. I think it's why you see, like Thimbleweed Park. We've sold more copies of Thimbleweed Park on Switch than any other platform, and I think that is because it has that touchscreen just built into it, and it's just a natural.
There's also this sort of cozy movement in games, and I would say a lot of your games have that sort of cozy feel to them. I think that it really a place, a feeling, a sort of an enjoyable, safe sort of air of excitement, as it were. Is there some sort of way you would categorize that, or is that something you're aiming for? And I don't even know what I'm asking here.
Well, I think that, adventure games have always kind of felt to me like curling up in front of the fire with a good novel. It's just, it's not this experience that gets your adrenaline going. It's just something you can sit, you can relax, and you can enjoy a wonderful conversation happening. And I think that's probably where you get that sense of cozy from.
Absolutely. I think that hits it right on the head. You're very right. Even though there is peril, especially in, say, the King's Quest series, which you mentioned, it's not necessarily peril that just leaps out and grabs you.
Yeah, but it's not peril that, your twitch reflexes are coming in to play. You're not in peril because you can't, jump left and jump right and do a double flip and, all at the same time. It's more in peril because you're kind of experiencing the story, and you're kind of making decisions that may put you in or take you out of peril, but it is more of a relaxed decision making that you're doing.
Just to follow up on some of the previous podcasts, I wanted to ask what it was like working on Last Crusade, the Indiana Jones. That was the first actual Lucas property that you'd had your hands on, right?
Yeah, it was. And, as you probably heard from David and other people, it's like we couldn't work on the Lucas stuff. It's like we couldn't make a Star Wars game. And, I think in the end that probably saved us, right? I think had we been able to make Star Wars games, that's probably all we ever would have made. And the fact that we couldn't make them meant that we had to go out and create things like Maniac Mansion and Loom and Monkey Island and, all these other games. And Indiana Jones, if I remember that correctly, I mean, David and Noah might have a better recollection, but if I remember that correctly, it was they had licensed the game to someone else, and then this other person fell through and wasn't going to finish it. There was something weird. So we had to make the game really, really fast because the movie was coming out. There wasn't a lot of time left. And then Steve Arnold, our boss, got Noah and David and I together and said, go make an adventure game.
Well, I've got a few minutes left here, and I wanted to talk about what you're doing these days. What are you playing these days?
Oh wow, what I'm playing nothing. I was chatting with a friend, and he was texting me about a bunch of games he's playing and some movies he's watching, and I sent him back and I said, where do you have the time to do any of this stuff? Because I just don't. I'm working really hard on the game that I'm working on, and when I get done working on it, I just want to go sit on the couch and watch brainless TV shows. So I actually have not been doing a lot of gaming. I was playing a lot of World of Warcraft because they came out with a classic, World of Warcraft classic. So I really got into that, but when my game ramped up, I had to stop doing that.
See, that brings up a major point that we always got asked because of our Habitat project, which is how do you preserve an MMO? And we were very pleased to see Blizzard do the classic, version of that MMO. But it begs the question: what do you do with those games?
Yeah, I don't know, right? Because it's not just a bunch of code on a single floppy disk, right? It's a whole bunch of code running on servers, and yeah, I mean, it was really nice that Blizzard did that with the classic, and I think, kind of to their credit and also to the frustration, it's like they did really preserve it very much the classic game. It's like all of the frustrating things that they solved in the Burning Crusade, just one patch farther along, they kept in classic. So I think you really did get to experience a lot of the frustration with that game. But yeah, how do you preserve it? I don't know.
I think they've sort of shown the way that institutional preservation of MMOs should be done. I think you're very right there, like preserving all the warts and all, right?
Yeah. It's a tough problem, right? I have a lot of sympathy for people trying to do this, because film, we can still show films that were made in 1914, right? The technology has not changed that much in how we show that stuff, that there is going to become a point when that technology just doesn't exist anymore, or it's so, in the case of MMOs, it's just so dispersed and cobbled together from all sorts of things. There's just no way to replicate it anymore.
Yeah, and that's it's definitely a concern. But hopefully, at least in small steps, we can preserve bits of it, and
sure,
with the classic thing.
Yeah, I think companies probably need to be better about releasing source code, for old games that have no real market value to them anymore. Preserving that source code with places that do that kind of stuff. I think companies just need to be better at that.
Oh, absolutely, and that's like Frank's whole thing that they've taken on over at the History Foundation. So, thank God for him. Ron Gilbert, thank you so much for being with us today.
Yeah, thank you. This was a lot of fun.
All right, thank you, Alex and Ron, for that wonderful conversation. We can't wait. We hope to have you back because that would be fantastic to hear more from you and your upcoming endeavors. I know you're. I saw an info that he released a free game last year during the lockdown called Dolores, a Thimbleweed Park mini game, mini adventure rather. Sorry, so. He was the directable writer, designer, and programmer for that, working with Terrible Toy Box Incorporated. So everybody should give that a shot and support our guests and maintain a living legend, if you will. But let's get into talking about some of the news as well. Sorry, guys. CD Projekt Red's back in the news.
It's always you.
I'm sorry. I can't help it. I feel like I'm beating a dead horse, but I think someone actually just took advantage of them, and they hacked them and their source code, held them for ransom, locked them out of some of their systems. But CD Projekt Red has released a statement and said they're not going to negotiate, that they do have backups of their source code, which is very important and like what we've been talking about. So they're all like, and the hackers threatened to release their source code. But this ties in kind of well with everything else that's been going on, because if the source code's released, then yes, some people like will see how you do your work, which is your intellectual property, but it's also kind of renegade preservation, if you will. I'm not in support of anyone doing anything criminal or holding company and threatening the livelihoods of people that are just working for a company that are trying to do anything else. So I don't support what they're doing, but one could call it renegade open sourcing. But it's not, because they're holding it for ransom. So
It seems to me there's a trend that more and more hackers are targeting game dev companies specific, because I think I heard of similar news last year about Capcom. The same exactly thing happened to them. Their stuff was stolen and the news was leaked. I'm not sure how much the source code or game contents are stolen, but I'm sure there's some part of it gone.
Yeah, it's an unfortunate circumstance that keeps on happening. So also, I think we need to also just talk about this. I'm sorry to bring this up. This will be the last I talk about this for the foreseeable future. I promise I'll find another game to play.
I mean, it's a fun game.
Yeah, no, I mean it is very fun. Like I said, I enjoy it, but also I can talk about other things too, and I need to prove that. It's pre-orders are an issue right now, and like was the issue with was the issue with CD Projekt Red and Cyberpunk, and among many other disastrous games that were kind of hyped at launch, like hyped before launch, and then had a very terrible launch. No Man's Sky, for example, another game I love. Don't need to go into that. It's a great game now. But pre-ordering games lends itself to people purchasing content that is not complete, and without you're funding something that isn't quite complete yet, which I kind of help get. I kind of understand, but game companies need to release finished products. Like they need. I don't think they're doing enough kind of playtesting or anything to make an official release on many occasions, and I think that's an issue that many people like struggle with, and that it's hard to get over in justifying paying an early access to get all these things just to play a broken game upon release.
Yeah.
So then, can I ask you this, Red? What are your thoughts on Kickstarter games?
That I think is like a different story, because it's not a giant production studio. Like Kickstarter games, there are some issues, because I did play Mighty Number 9 from like the original developer, like one of the early Mega Man developers, made a new kind of spiritual successor to like an early Mega Man game, and they also didn't have like the testing base, which is an issue. There's a lot of things that were kind of upsetting with that. But I also feel like that's a little bit more of a gamble, because there's not as much info dropping. They can like drop off the earth. I mean, it's a gamble, but it's also, if you believe in it, support it. But if I'm hesitant with those because some people take advantage of like Indiegogo and GoFundMe circumstances, and that's where I'm like hesitant.
Yeah, I think.
What do you think about? Like, I want to think what you guys hear about.
Yeah, I think the main difference between Kickstarter and the big company pre-orders is only about how much budget they have by the time they start developing. I mean, the Kickstarter the indie devs usually just they need that bucket of money in order to make things to go on, so that they can make the games to be pushed out. But for the pre-orders big company, they don't need that. They already have some amount of budget and capital for it to go on, and their income will be from the sales of the game. It really depends on how good they can make it, and I think that's the main difference. That's why we probably don't like pre-order as much as Kickstarter, and why is Kickstarter more reasonable in my opinion. And I think and I think Nintendo is doing something about it, because I was currently trying to pre-order the Monster Hunter Rise, and unlike before you paid at the point you pre-order, I think Nintendo actually told me that we are not charging you until it's 2 weeks before the game release. I think it has been it should have been a pretty good like safety precaution for those kind of game delays.
Yes, I definitely think that that's a good safety mechanism, you know, like it prevents like we're not going to charge you. We have your order ready to go.
Yeah.
But don't need to save the money.
And I mean, nowadays more and more of us are just buying digital edition. I think of course I know package is important, people, and I know a lot of people like to have their package in the room, but there's a huge player base switching to the digital too, because it's just more convenient. You can just play it right at the time it releases, and it's not like we don't have enough packages version of it. It's not like that anymore, because it's digital. You pay and you get the game. It doesn't matter how much they have. So I think,
I mean,
yeah,
I still really enjoyed like the packaging of the games, and that's kind of one of the things that I think some of these other games have done really well. I mean, like I loved reading the old manuals in the old games. I mean, they were their own art pieces, and like they really explained the game.
My only thing,
and, like the mechanics.
My only thing with packages is only really because of my lifestyle. I have to move a lot. I've been constantly moving to different places. But what happened to me is it's actually, every single time I check, okay, how many CD packages I have, and I have to fill them into more than one suitcase, and it's still not enough space for them to fit in. And that is the main reason why I have been switching from package to digital. It's just not happening for some of the people like me. Just
no, and that's a very valid point. I mean, it's like I've been moving recently more often than I have, and I also agree that it's like, oh yeah, I have a lot of crap.
Yeah.
So I need to downsize. Like I have a lot of stuff that is kind of seemingly
you don't want to
unnecessary.
throw any of them away. You just don't. You don't do that. It just
I know.
It feels
I might have to
bad.
go back to using my parents' house as a storage unit.
Yeah.
We'll see. So, Anthony, I need to hear from you and what do you think about the pre-order situation?
Yeah, pre-orders are very interesting. Back before when we had to purchase games from retailers, I believe pre-orders were mainly used to ensure that you had a copy of the game, so that if the game sold out, you for sure had a copy because you pre-ordered it.
Yeah,
But
definitely.
now, during today's times, we can just instantly download games in an instant. And so the pre-order sort of loses its sort of value, I guess, of course, it comes with perks like, oh, you can play the game a few hours early than everyone else, or you can get this really cool hat for your character that no one else can get. But to me, I feel that isn't really much of a motive to pre-order a game, especially I feel a lot of studios, the way they advertise their game, it's not completely transparent. So I would say be hesitant to pre-order a game.
Yeah, I agree. Be hesitant, and some of these large companies don't necessarily need the encouragement to release a broken game. Hopefully that we'll see more complete releases in the future.
Yeah, because it's happening way too often, and it's not fair to the consumer.
No, it's not. And it's not a good look for the companies. It's not a good look for the industry at large either. But I think it's. I have faith, and also with people like Ron Gilbert and other now smaller independent developers. They're taking things into their own hands and creating fantastic pieces of work.
I think another reason for this kind of stuff keep happening is because of the skill gap between the top people of game development is the gap between them with the beginners, like the fresh grad students. It's very huge. So they don't have enough people to have the enough skill to make things to come up in time.
Yeah.
That's what I heard about it. I think we need to do something to fill that gap in, but it's like it has been a serious story. You see, you don't usually see that kind of delays happening in Japanese developing company because they have a very good education system that is from bottom to top, and you just go inside and with everything you need educated, and that's the reason you don't usually see delays from them. That's what I truly believe, and I think if somehow we can copy part of it in here, it'd be great.
Definitely. No, there's a lot of personal responsibility and respect involved with just the Japanese education system, and I think that we could learn a little bit from that as well. But I think that is unfortunately all we have for this week. But I want to thank you again for listening. Thank you all for listening to the Museum of Art and Digital Entertainment's official podcast. If you've got any thoughts, questions, corrections, or general museum ideas, shoot us an email at info@themade.org.
We'd like to send out a big thank you to everyone who donated recently, and to our patron supporters who keep the Made afloat. Patron donors get to listen to this podcast 1 week before it's released on major streaming servers, and we'll continue that with future episodes every week. Till then, I'm Chun.
I'm Red.
And I'm Anthony. Thanks. We'll see you next time.
See you next time.
See you next time.